Okay, welcome to episode 4 of Death Diaries. We are speaking to the legend Dave Kennedy. This is Andy. This is Anleek. We are trying to collect information from the best cybersecurity professionals because we want to be the best threat hunters in this world. Um, if you don't know who Dave Kennedy is already, our title for this episode is just going to be Dave Kennedy because I feel like that's good enough explanation. He's running 10 to 12 successful businesses. He's a father. He is pretty much one of the best CEOs in cybersecurity, in my opinion, because he's running blue team, red team. He's doing a lot of ventures. One of the best, entrepreneurs in our space. And what just this is a personal story. We reached out, and within 5 minutes, he was like, "Let's go." No pre-questions. He's like, "Let's get to recording as soon as we can." Nobody's responding like this, so we're very happy to have him on here.
Yeah. And
I think my exact comment was we don't have to have a pre-call. I like to YOLO, so we'll figure it out as we go along. I think that's the most genuine dialogue you can have. So yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on.
All right. So to get us started, I'm in SOC and he's in IR, and we're trying to get into threat hunting. So, um, as you've built, you have binary defense and TrustedSec. Where do you see threat hunting evolving into, from a business perspective? Is it something that companies want? Is there bottlenecks that, we, as we're learning threat hunting, we can observe and solve? How do you feel about that entire space?
Yeah, so much. I think so much to unpack here because I've been in this industry for about 29 years. So started my career off in the military intelligence side of the house, doing offensive capabilities for the NSA, and the industry's changed a lot. If you go back, let's just say 15, 20 years, everybody focused on very specific vulnerabilities that they could fix in their environment. So you'd have a penetration test, and usually we break in like day one or two, and then I'd spend like the next week just writing cool tools and new hacks and things like that. And that was kind of like I would say the golden era of cybersecurity in a offensive side. It wasn't really helping too much on defense because you literally go in and you break into the company the same way next year because they didn't patch the other system that you didn't find, and it was this real reactive industry. And so we weren't really raising the bar in cybersecurity. And then we came out kind of with Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain, and then the MITRE ATT&CK framework came out, and it really started to shift the focus away from vulnerabilities. I'm not saying vulnerabilities are important. You have to have a good vulnerability management program, but it also started focusing on, hey, what are the steps that adversaries take to compromise an organization? What does that look like in our environment? And do we have appropriate controls to be able to defend against it? So everything from initial access to establishing command and control to privilege escalation, lateral movement, data exfiltration, all of those different phases, gave a nice visual and conceptual thing that the industry could then take and start to look at that and say, hey, how do we build good defensive mechanisms in place? And I think that really raised the bar on defense a lot because we weren't always focused just on the myopic vulnerability to patch. That's still important, but we recognize that we're not going to always be able to fix every single vulnerability in our organization. It's not possible. I mean, a user's going to click on something, and we're going to have a web application flaw that we didn't know about, or a patch that came out and they exploited it super quick, or we were specifically targeted by an adversary we didn't have a capability developed for from a defensive side. So that shift really changed maturity levels, I think, in organizations, which really kind of birthed the whole threat hunting, proactive threat hunting market because there wasn't a need 15 or 20 years ago because the cybersecurity programs weren't designed to be able to handle. It's very similar to like red teams, for example. Red teams, we get all the time at TrustedSec, the company's like, hey, we want a red team, we want a red team. And we look at their security program, we're like, hey, you folks really just need a penetration test because you're not going to be able to digest what a red team comes out of that with to be able to even help your security program because you don't even have monitoring and detection capabilities. You don't have centralized logging. You don't have all these key components in place to handle that type of report. And so with that shift and where I see a lot of companies moving towards, and I think, EDRs were a great visibility point that we didn't have before in the past, centralization of endpoint logging, which as we all know, endpoints are traditionally the center point of attack.
yeah.
So, that really kind of birthed, I think, both the threat intelligence and the threat hunting
Mm.
discussions because companies now are saying, well, what do I focus on? What are my priorities? What adversaries want to target me? And what are their capabilities? And how do I assume, how do I identify if they've ever been in my infrastructure before? But also more so on like the hypothesis-based threat hunting, if I'm going into my own environment with specific adversaries type of techniques and, tactics, techniques, and procedures, if I don't see it, how do I evolve that into building better detection capabilities in my environment to, withstand that in the future so I don't see those? And so, we're seeing threat hunting really start to take off in a lot of the more mature companies and then either leveraging third parties to help them develop that, or building it in house if they're a large organization like large financial institutions. I see the financial industry really kind of leads it, and always has traditionally led it from
Mm,
a cybersecurity program perspective. They usually have probably the most advanced industry vertical because they're protecting money. It's
mm,
very easy to say we have to protect money.
mm,
Whereas, if you're in manufacturing, we're protecting, our manufacturing process, which is a much harder sell. We don't have tangible money, even though it really is tied to the same type of figure. It's not viewed the same way.
mm,
So I think, if you look at the industry itself, it's in a continual evolution that we have to evolve to. And I think, threat hunting is a really key component of that to really, ensure you have the appropriate controls, both preventative and detective, but also you're continuously maturing this, the security program. And we can start talking about AI and everything else that's going to help, I think, a lot with a lot of this. But, I think the industry is really maturing to a level to where threat hunting should be in almost every organization. I always say, to me, if I had two critical roles within an organization that I would hire, it would be a detection engineering person and a threat hunting person.
mm,
Yeah.
To me, those are the two most critical things you can have in an organization today. And you can't have them focus on anything else other than those two things. They should be
mm.
writing new detections, doing hypothesis-based threat hunts, literally in that environment all day long. And I guarantee you, within 6 months to a year, that organization is going to be extremely difficult to compromise from an attacker's perspective. Like, raises the bar exponentially really quick.
Okay, that's fantastic. Our podcast is called Death Diaries, so that's what we're focusing on, detection engineering and threat hunting. Um, why is it hard so often to sell, leadership or C-suite threat hunting as like a program or a package? How can that be communicated better?
Yes, I think companies get really what's the best word? Complacent, probably, in what a standard cybersecurity program should look like. So, you have your GRC program, your governance program, you have, your SIM program, and you have your SOC, or you might, outsource that, and you're kind of stuck in the cyclical effect of, hey, we had a pen test done, did they catch it? Did they have a red team done? Did we catch it? When you look at proactive security programs, you're trying to continuously raise the bar within reason. You don't want to be, not every company wants to be Fort Knox, or have to give a blood sample to get into their computer. So it's understanding where your maturity level is at currently today, where you want to move to, and then really building those stages. And where I see a lot of organizations really fail is that they get into this really long-term strategy. Like, when they look at 3 years ahead and 5 years ahead. And so they build these big programs where they, hey, we're going to completely get rid of our, last gen firewalls and move to next gen firewalls. And we have to reteach all of our, network engineers how to redo, your entire infrastructure and learn a whole new technology and syntax and everything else. And so it creates so much complexity in an organization. And what we should be doing is reducing complexity, making things much smaller to tie off on. And I think when you start to look at that, like, one of the big areas in cybersecurity that I never understood why it hasn't taken off. I've only seen a few companies implement this, is deception capabilities. And by the way, that's a great area for detection engineering and threat hunting.
Yeah.
And, deception is one of the most ridiculous things that an attacker has to go through. I always like to go back to my military time in the Marines and take a landmine field. So if I have a landmine field and I'm stepping in front of a landmine field, and I have a blueprint of that landmine field, I know if I step right, I'm going to land on the landmine. Well, I'm going to move forward, so I don't step on that landmine. Then I'm going to move left, then I'm going to move straight. But if I don't have a blueprint for that landmine and I don't know where those landmines are, I'm going to trip up a landmine.
Yeah.
And, I think Egypt, James Lee, a really phenomenal person, was on the Metasploit development team, just really amazing researcher. He was arguing with a red teamer at one point in time. And I think the red teamer said something to the effect of, it only takes one vulnerability or one asset that an organization didn't know about to compromise the entire organization. And James flipped the script and said, well, it only takes one detection that the adversary didn't know about to completely know that attacker's in that environment. And so I think it's just, how do we systemically look at a security program and move very quickly? Don't get me wrong, like, still build those pillars, governance programs and things like that that are going to take years. But how do we get some really quick wins in an organization? And that's really where I see, detection engineering, threat hunting, deception capabilities. You can get some amazing quick wins. Hey, just looking for things like LLM-R or NBNS, or, looking at, lateral movement, or looking at Mimikatz, process injection, and trying to, do undocumented features in W digest. Like, those things are really easy to get detections around, but people just don't spend the time because they're focused on these big things. And I also have to say, cybersecurity folks, we're a jack of all trades. So we're focused on 70 different projects. We have 30 different meetings. And so carving out individual resources that can just focus on those specific things is very difficult for a company to do. I mean, the detection engineers can get roped into incident response. They're going to get roped into all of these other areas. Their dedicated job isn't going to become their dedicated job, and that's really where I think we have to look at it. I was the chief security officer for Diebold for a number of years. I ran their global security program. We have a team of 55 folks. And when I came into that organization, very, very immature security program. I mean, they stopped patching for 2 years because they didn't want to impact the business, right?
Mhm.
And so, and this is circa this is 2008, 2009. So that has obviously since changed quite a bit. But I came into that organization, and the first thing I did was I didn't start fixing things or tackling issues. I started developing relationships
Mm.
with all of the different business leaders and establishing trust with them. So I was best friends with our CIO, the entire IT team. I bought them beer and pizza all the time, especially when I'd break stuff. My leadership knew I was presenting at 26 years old to our board of directors,
Oh.
as a VP in cybersecurity. And the big thing, once I had that buy-in, I can come in and start changing process. So I would focus on our vulnerability management program, and we got behind the scenes so when a new application was coming live, we knew from the middleware tier down to the OS and firmware and everything who was going to handle the patch management process of that, what the exceptions were, how we were going to handle risk, was it internal, external, what had a higher priority. So I fixed our vulnerability management program from the very beginning, and then I started proactively fixing the rest of the stuff, and we were able to make some really fast changes to that cybersecurity program. So within a year, we won, I think, the SE Magazine's top cybersecurity program of the year based on making very small changes very rapidly within the environment while focusing on other big things. And I think most companies just lose focus on, hey, we can make 10 changes today that elevate our security program 50% while we focus on all the other stuff. I think that's the big challenge is just the lack of focus on the stuff that matters the most.
I really love the pizza and beer method because I recently just understood that the thing we sell in cybersecurity is trust. So the fact
Yep.
that you gain trust and you were able to sell them like,
That's
hey,
why I
you
call
can
it
sleep at night.
TrustedSec. TrustedSec.
Oh,
You
yeah.
trust our security, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
I'll tell you a funny story real quick. So
Yeah.
this is a good example of how to get things done. And I'm not saying anybody should do this because I got in a little bit of trouble for it. But that we were implementing Cisco ICE at the time, which at the time we were one of the first customers of Cisco to implement this. And if you're not familiar with ICE, it's 802.1x ACL access down to the switch port level based on identity. And
Mm.
so what that means is, you can when someone plugs in into the network, they get the same ACLs no matter where they're at in the company, segmentation, everything else. And at the same time, we were implementing something called ScanSafe, which got implemented, I think, into the AMP stack with Cisco. And ScanSafe, what it would do is it would proxy chain. So all of your 80 and 443 traffic would proxy chain over like 8080, for example, go to a ScanSafe tower, do SSL termination, and then ensure that nothing was coming back from like a C2 perspective. You weren't going to malicious websites, things like that. And they had ScanSafe towers all across the world, so you would proxy chain to the closest proxy server that you had.
Yeah.
And so what I was trying to do was I was trying to stop all egress filtering. So I didn't want any shells going out 53, 22, 80, 443. I wanted to cut it all out. Now, we're a global company, so we had over 27,000 employees, 60,000 assets, in our inventory. And so how do you make a sweeping change where you're blocking all egress filtering across the entire company and rerouting all of your endpoints and servers, by the way, out to ScanSafe towers to do SSL termination? That's a big change, right?
Yeah.
And I was looking at it and I was like, well, the normal processes and the amount of approvals that I'd have to go with for this would take probably 6 to 7 years to me to implement in this company. So how do I make this go faster? And so I went to one of our network engineers and I'm like, hey man, try to find so we were at ITIL shop, so ITIL change control process, okay? And I went to my network engineer friend that I bought lots of beers and pizza for, and I was like, hey man, try to find an RFC, a request for change,
Huh.
that kind of sounds similar to this, and let's just see if we could just go and do it. If it breaks stuff, I'll figure it out. I'll take the heat for it. We'll do it.
Hmm.
And he's like, no, man, there's no way. He's like, I'm gonna get in so much trouble for this. There's no way I can do this. I'm like, no, trust me. I'll take the heat. Like, it's my call, my fault. He's like, no, man. So then I went to my buddy Scott Schaefer, who works for me right now, actually at Binary Defense. He's the craziest brain on network engineering I've ever met in my entire life. I mean, the guy just speaks protocols and everything. But I'm like, and he was newer at the time. He, younger junior network engineer. I'm like, hey man, come here. Let's figure out an RFC that we can block all egress filtering across the entire company, reroute all endpoints out to 8080 and block all C2. It literally blocks all C2. Like you couldn't get any shell out of
Mhm.
DNS, you couldn't get it over TLS, nothing. And he's like, all right, let's figure this out. So we did it, and we broke our production manufacturing process for like 8 hours because they did code signing down to the cert board to chain all the hardware together,
Uh-huh.
and it broke our manufacturing process. But overall, it actually went really smooth. We were able to fix it in a few hours. It was not a huge deal. I got my butt chewed out a little bit from the main, but I was good friends with the VP in that area, so he was like, "Nah, man, I understand what you're doing. You're cool." But I was able to implement sweeping change across the entire organization literally within like 4 weeks. Make sure we tested everything, put it in monitor mode first, and then we pulled the switch. We only had minor breakages here and there, but I was able to implement significant change in a company, whereas normally would have taken me 6 years, to do something like that. We have to think like that in cybersecurity. Now, be obviously cognizant of the business, but really start to push the envelope. And I think, most organizations and most cybersecurity programs I see, they're so politically charged in saying like, I can't break anything. I can't be the reason why the business, had an issue. I can't change, culture of the company. And I think it's our job and responsibility to do that. We're trying to protect the company from risk. We have to be able to move to change, bad practices before in the past to get to good ones, and we have to move fast on it. So, you know, I think a lot of people, a lot of chief security officers really lack that political side to say, hey, I'm friends with everybody. I'm just gonna have a friend discussion here of what we're gonna do, and we're just gonna go and do it. We're gonna handle it. We'll take the blowback. I got your back, you got my back. Let's go and figure this out. Let's go and do it and execute it. That's hard to do in most companies, right?
Yeah, I think that speaks to the hacker or cyberpunk ethos of wanting to break it and then figuring out what's going to
Yeah.
happen after. And that's how you really evolve and learn about things.
Yeah, I think at my current spot, I was asked to tune something and I asked like, hey, can I just like implement this? And they were like, you ask questions later, like you'll cover your ass later, but for now, just do it, implement
Yeah.
it. You have to. So
That's
something
the way
that
to
I
do it.
started appreciating. Yeah.
Yeah. We got to do that. And again, it has to be, well thought out and planned and methodical. We don't want to just, YOLO the entire security program,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I'm not going to wait 6 years of my life, in 700 meetings, to build something that just, I could just literally do. And I know if it breaks something, I could fix it in a couple hours. It's not going to be that detrimental to the company. So, it's those types of things. And moving towards like the detection engineering side of the house too, like we have to be able to move fast in detection engineering. If your detection engineering program isn't more agile in nature to where you're cranking out new detections as things come out real time, you're really failing. And so something I've been working on at Binary Defense that we're actually about to release to our customers next week. So you're getting a little early access into here. But I've been developing an AI system called Night Beacon, and it's our own large language model. And so we're not using Claude or GPT or anything like that, OpenAI. What we're doing is we have our own language model. And what I was looking at was I'm not going to come out with an AI solution that for our customers that is just marketing. It actually has to solve a problem. It has
Yeah.
to make our SOC better in some way. Okay. And the way that I did it is we use Palo Alto's XOR for security orchestration automation response. And that ties into all our threat intelligence feeds and our playbooks and everything else so that, an analyst has everything they need in one central pane for multiple technologies. We support all the EDRs and all the SIMs out there and anything else you can throw at us, we'll take. And so I was like, well, how do I embed in this process to leverage our analyst knowledge and train our models from our analysts to be really, really smart? So that because AI is really centric off of contextual data. If you just feed it a bunch of logs, it doesn't know. It doesn't know if that's good or bad or what's right or wrong. So what I did was, in XOR, I created an underlying API call that will every time an analyst escalates something as a false positive or a true positive, it retrains the model on the context of the analyst notes and the log file from the customer. And then I created something that's pretty cool. It's called synthetic data log generation. So what happens is customers really care, obviously, about their customer data. And if we're training off of customer data, most people are going to be like, hey, well, I don't want my customer information being shared in this model that could be potentially queried or prompt injected or things like that. And so what I did is I created this synthetic data log extraction layer where it will train off of the log data, but it never uses any of the original log data content. So we're storing fake data, but it's the same attack from the context of the analyst. And so it allows, if you think about it, like, you guys came from the SOC and you're at the SOC today. Some SOC folks have strengths in certain areas and weaknesses in other areas. So you might have a SOC analyst that's amazing at web applications but sucks at network,
Hmm.
or is really good at Python programming language but sucks at living off land binaries and scripts, or doesn't have a lot of knowledge there because they haven't seen it before.
Yeah.
A good example is we had a SOC analyst. If any of us see mshta.exe, we're already like,
Yeah.
oh, something's wrong here, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
But if an analyst hasn't seen MSHT, we had a SOC analyst where we have this endpoint agent called Vision, which gives more visibility into the environment, and it triggered on MSHT execution. And the SOC analyst had never seen MSHTA before, and so what it did was, in the notes, it said, hey, the analyst went and said, well, it's calling mshta.exe with Amazon admin login.hta. And if you Google Amazon login.hta, Amazon actually has a fallback method for logging into their AWS infrastructure via an HTA file. So the analyst went through all the steps and said, well, this is a false positive because, it's on Google, the reputation's fine, everything else. Now, luckily, the secondary things around payload generation kicked in and was able to trigger, but the analysts didn't have that knowledge. So because we're training AI in a way that is off of all of our analyst knowledge, what it does is it raises that SOC analyst knowledge now to 90% of all of our SOC analysts, and they can make a very quick determination on
Mm,
whether or not something's malicious.
yeah.
And getting to really quick detection engineering, I built this thing called Nexus. And so if there's a new, let's just say we run into a customer that has some crazy PLC devices, some process logic controllers in their IT/OT infrastructure. And I haven't trained, the model hasn't seen it before, it doesn't recognize it. I can take Nexus and I can say, hey, go out and learn everything you possibly can about this PLC. Go to the SDKs, go to previous research papers, and it combs the internet from an open source intelligence perspective and generates training data to be smarter on. You can do the same thing, by the way, if there's a new exploit. So let's just say there's a new GitHub page that comes out of a new POC.
Hmm.
It'll grab that GitHub page, stand up a Kubernetes instance, build TTPs for that, and then automatically train the model to be smarter off of those specific areas. So we can move much faster on detections. And what's cool about it is it's taken, so take a specific attack. Let's just say someone runs regsvr32.exe. It's downloading a scripted object, and it does remote code execution. It'll look at that whole chain and it'll say, okay, regsvr32 is being executed. Here's the file it's going and downloading. Let me download that file. Let me disassemble it and understand what the code is doing. Let me look at the reputation, the URL. Let me pull in all my threat intelligence feeds. And here's the entire narrative of everything that happened with confidence rankings for the analyst to make a determination. And it's all done within 1 millisecond. And so, that type of stuff gives our analysts a ton of power because we have the visibility and, the innovations that are happening with AI to be able to do things really quickly. And what's really cool with AI specifically is it can also understand human language, obviously, because generative AI is based off of that, right?
Yeah.
And so we can actually look at the tonality of an email. And I have this probability matrix that says, hey, what categories are they trying to elicit you to do in this area? So is it trying to create fear? Is it trying to create persistence? Is it trying to create, you to take action? And it'll take that and it'll say, well, it has a SVG file with embedded links into it to get, a credential harvester. It'll tell you all of that real time. And it takes a lot of that analyst time down really quickly to be able to, make a determination. And I think, if you look at that from a holistic side of cybersecurity, our whole job is to find that needle in the haystack. So ways we can make that easier and ways we can move faster. Going back to my point of detection engineering has to be extremely fast. Threat hunting has to be extremely fast. And out of the threat hunt should come new detections that make your security program faster. That should be as fast as committing a GitHub, repo with a proper CI/CD, pipeline. That should be a very fast process within most organizations. But what I really see is it's a really long process to get new detections into place. It's really, they don't understand the coverage that they have or even the effectiveness of that. And I think that's really where, threat hunting, red teaming, detection engineering, they all play such a critical component in making sure that program's successful. That's why I say detection engineering, threat hunting are the two most important job roles in a cybersecurity program today.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of great insight. Um, I think one question that spawns now that you mentioned, right, those two roles being super important. If you were looking at someone and saying, "Hey, I need these two roles," what are the characteristics of this person? What are the skill levels that you're requiring? How can you make sure that they're gonna, do the job correctly, have the impact that you want them to have? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so I think having metrics around your program is important. So one, if you break things down, what I see very effective in most organizations, which is also, by the way, really good for board reporting. A lot of this is being a chief sales officer at the same time. And so I think, when I go into some board presentations and I go through quite a bit of those, I see a lot of chief security officers like, well, hey, here's my vulnerability management program. We had 10 million vulnerabilities. We got it down to 9 million vulnerabilities. Here's my governance program. Here's the areas that we're improving on policy. Oh, hey, we had a penetration test. We came back perfectly clean. Everything's great. That is the most boring presentation, and it means absolutely nothing to board of directors. Where I see where cybersecurity programs have a lot of success is where they're flipping the script and they're saying, hey folks, here's adversaries in that want access to our data. We can see that based on they breached one of our competitors, or they're specifically targeting this industry vertical from ransomware, or because we do work with the government. We're obviously under subject to APT threats like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. So here's the adversaries, and here's what they're doing, and giving them a little bit of knowledge on what these groups, where they're located at, what they're doing, how they're compromising organizations, and then saying, by the way, here's how we fare against these adversaries if they were to target us today. And here's where our security program's at today. And here's why I need funding to shore up these gaps to be able to fix these specific areas. And so if I was looking at that, and most cybersecurity programs don't have a coverage map of how well they're doing from a detection perspective. Hey, here's all of the steps that these adversaries would do. Here's our coverage in those areas. And by the way, here's our effectiveness. So coverage being a binary, 1 or 0. Do we have coverage here? Yes or no? Effectiveness is how good is that control? Well, if we were able to implement these two systems, it would give us an effectiveness rating of 10 versus a 2 that we have today. And so, it's looking at that and prioritizing it based on who would want to go after our organizations. And so the first thing I would do is, one, develop metrics of how many detections, how many threat hunts we should be running on a weekly, monthly basis, and what are the outputs of that. And also the kind of the feedback loop that goes back into it. How can we improve this to move faster in the future? Can we set up some really nice automation workflows that allow us to push into production, retroactively hunt before in the past when we build a new detection, and then reduce false positives off of that, and then move it forward into production. We're actually doing something similar to this at Binary Defense. We have it's called Tide. It's our detection engineering as code service platform for our MDR customers. And what we do is when we write a new detection, it uses AI to generate that. So we'll use one detection programming language to write the detection, or it might help us with it writing it, and then it'll automatically translate it to Sentinel, to Splunk, to CrowdStrike, and then it pushes those detections out to the customers, but not into production. What it does is it retroactively hunts back on any available data that we have in the past to see if we have any hits on it. And then it automatically says, okay, well, based on our analysis, AI does this for us automatically. It says, based off of this, there's a lot of false positives here. Here's how we would write this tailored detection to this customer to reduce false positives, but not remove the true sense of the detection. And then eventually that gets pushed out into production, right? So automation workflow, I think, is really important, establishing that process. And that part might be a little bit slow, right? While you're setting this up and as you're going and doing it, establishing this program, it may be a little bit slow. And then as you start to come into this, you can start to build all that automation into place. This program starts to move very fast. That's how you have to kind of tool these programs. Now, people that are amazing threat hunters and detection engineering folks, previous red team penetration folks, they understand, attack cycles, offensive capabilities. They have made some of the most phenomenal threat hunters and detection engineering folks I've ever seen in my life. Same thing coming from the security operations center to the incident response side. Amazing threat hunters and detection engineers, because you've seen the attacks in the wild. Even systems administrators make phenomenal detection engineers and threat hunters because they understand how the systems work and how they're supposed to behave. And then when those misuses happen, some of the best red teamers that we have at TrustedSec came through being systems administrators, because they understand how to set up systems. They understand how Microsoft works. I was actually just presenting. We have a local career center here, and they have a cybersecurity program. And I went in and I talked to the kids in the cybersecurity program, but I came in about an hour early just to talk to the professor. And I was curious on how he was running a cybersecurity program, because what I see from a lot of college programs or even high school programs is that when they're teaching cybersecurity, they're teaching like a mile wide, inch thick. It's like, hey, we're going to go over Sleuthkit, we're going to go over Metasploit, we're going to go over MAP, but they're not understanding the protocols. They're not understanding, IT administration and how to set up domains. They don't have the foundational knowledge. And I was really surprised to see their program. The first thing they focused on wasn't hacking. It was networking fundamentals, programming fundamentals, IT administration, system administration, setting up your own domains. Then you start to build, the knowledge off of that. And I think that's really where, detection engineering and threat hunting have those synergies, where if you come from pretty much any industry vertical within cybersecurity, as long as you're seeing the attacks or performing the attacks, you have a really good concept of where you should really focus your efforts on, and then put that into a framework that you can move very fast in an organization.
Mm. Cool. No, I think that's a lot of insight for us, right? I think we've both had an interest at one point or developing for, the offensive side. So I'm glad that, we're focusing on that a little bit.
Yeah,
And
one thing I can say is like if you look at I talked a little bit about before, but the financial industry, right? If you look at the financial industry and where they're at, that's usually a good indication of where the cybersecurity programs will be in another 5 years in the rest of the
mm,
industry. So it is my 28 years. It's always happened that way. So where the financial institutions were 5 years ago is where the industry really is at today,
Mm,
and because they can move much faster, they can impact the business to protect the organization. One of the financial institutions we work with, cybersecurity is built into the ethos of the entire company. So
mm,
everything they do has to be cybersecurity focused, and so the security is really the leading front runner in that, so they can make changes much faster, implement things much quicker. They don't have a lot of the political roadblocks or changing culture, things like that. So you can kind of see the trends where financial institutions move much faster than manufacturing, healthcare, et cetera. And so if you look at, today, most financial institutions have dedicated either a third party service or they have internal security staff that are just focused on detection engineering, that are just focused on threat hunting. And that's a core concept of their ethos of how they run their organization. I think that, this industry, if you look at all the shifts and changes that are happening with AI and everything else, especially around software engineering, I think you're going to see these two things really catapult up in the next few years.
yeah, and interesting if we remain on the topic of AI, right? Let's not pretend it's not, moving at a fast pace. How do you think it's going to impact threat hunting, detection engineering without it just being, IOC hunting or indicators of attack hunting, right? You want to leverage it without it just being, hey, let me go look for these artifacts. How do you think
Yep.
that's going to impact that field?
I'm glad you brought that up because that is one of my biggest pet peeves when the MITRE ATT&CK framework came out. When MITRE ATT&CK came out, it literally was a checklist of people to run through tools for specific
Yeah.
IOCs, and the detections were so fragile in environments that you literally, if you chain two law bins together, you get around the detections, right? And so it became a checklist of coverage, not effectiveness. And so you see that happen all the time. A new product comes out in the cybersecurity space, and everybody's like, "Oh, next generation is going to solve all of our security problems. We can solve all of our security problems with a product." No, it's not. Doesn't work that way. Every company is completely unique. The behavior that your company exhibits is different than any other company. Even if you have a sister company, they're completely different with the people, with the technology. You might be cloud predominant or on premise. You might be a hybrid. All of these variations create unusual behavior or unique behavior to your organization. And so the way that I look at AI, it's actually funny. I was just because I've been beaten down so many times at RSA conferences and other places of new technology that was coming out that is going to solve the industry. I looked at AI very skeptical initially. Especially up to about a year ago,
mm,
Yeah.
and then I started to see the shift and really where AI was really starting to become pretty darn good. And it's only since then gotten way more better. I use it
Yeah.
every single day. I mean, right now I have 6 agents running over here. I have, my Signal bot that's working on my website right now. I got all the stuff running at the same time. It's revolutionary, and I can build things much faster than I ever could before. And by the way, projects that I probably never would even take on because
Yeah.
it would just take me so much time, I can do it now, and it's awesome. Like I built my buddy's website, completely custom web application that is designed just off of his business process. It happens to be Airsoft,
mm,
and so his check-in process to his financial metrics to just resetting tickets every week. He had this really crummy website that you literally had to we had employees that he had to pay hourly to go in and change the website out and add the tickets every week, and it's all manual. You couldn't sell online because he didn't know how to sync to his point
Mm,
of sale system. I built it in 3 days, and it's a professional website that would have taken $400,000 or more and 6 months of a developer to go and build. And I built it in 3 days, like literally flawless launch, and then continuing to, iterate and add new features onto it. And I have it completely custom to where it integrates into his point of sale system with inventory, automatically populates his inventory online. So now you can sell e-commerce. It's, completely transformed his business. And so the power of AI is, I can honestly say today, is probably the single best technology I've seen released in my entire lifetime. And it's only going to get better. Now, what does that mean for us in the industry? And so, the thing that is the biggest piece for me is that cybersecurity isn't necessarily just a technology problem. It's also a people problem as
yeah.
well.
mm,
And so, if you look at things like source code analysis. Well, I think a lot of source code analysis will get more and more automated, but that's nothing new to us in the industry. We have source code analyzers today. It might just get better. There's the autonomous pen testing stuff that's coming out now, right? I've gotten to play with a lot of those products, and they're total garbage, but they're getting
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
It doesn't simulate what an attacker is going to do from a behavioral perspective in your environment. And so, it can, generate 10,000 alarms for you, and you can build those alarms out, but it's not going to simulate, a red team operator going in and trying to evade detection in your environment, see where your controls are at, and how do you build those controls in. It might help with the report generation and how you feed those, TTPs in. But, like I'll use the example that I used before of like Reg SVR 32. So what we commonly see for most organizations is that, if they're building a detection around Reg SVR 32 from a living off the land binaries and scripts perspective, they would, look for Reg SVR 32.exe with the /s/n/i, with an HTTP URL passing the scriptlet object DLL, strobj.dll.
Yeah.
And so you look at that and you say, well, if I remove the /s or I throw a caret, which is still, valid syntax, or I obfuscate that anyway, it doesn't trigger that detection. Or if I, chain, let's just say, Excel, which can download a file. So you use Excel's download functionality to download a file, and then I pass it locally to regsvr 32 to execute that scripted logic versus going out to a website, doesn't trigger detection. So the behavior around that is the most important piece to think about. And that's really where I think, the threat hunting piece on detection engineering is really, really important, because the threat hunters can say, hey, here's how I'm going to build this detection. I'm going to look across my entire environment. That do any of my users under the regular user account, not system account, but regular user, are they ever running Reg SVR 32 from a process creation perspective? So trigger an alarm anytime that process is ever created. I don't care about the syntax. I don't care about if it's going out to a website. I don't care if it's being passed with a scripted logic. I want to see anytime Reg SVR 32 is being run under the regular use of a account. And by the way, there might be a business process that does that. So we put in exceptions just for that specific business process to reduce those false positives. And then you're only focusing on the behavior. There's no way AI is going to take, those pieces of critical thinking and be able to build that into your environment that's truly unique to yourself. And so, cybersecurity, it's changing, it's evolving. I think it's evolving for the better. I think, we'll be able to move faster. If you look at security operations centers as one, like the Night Beacon solution I was talking about, we no longer have to wait 15 minutes for an analyst to, dive down into that. It has everything they need right there to respond faster. That's all we're trying to do, is response faster, allow them to be able to focus more time. You all know, being in the SOC, alert fatigue is a real thing. I mean, you're going through 10,000 false positives. You got to find that one real one out there. That sucks, So instead, reducing the noise, allowing, analysts to focus and spend more time on things that are most important, and really kind of making that better over time as well. And I don't see it as a job elimination perspective. At Binary Defense, we're not reducing analyst headcount. What we're doing is we're giving our analysts more time to actually spend the time that's needed on that alarm, versus like, hey, I only have 5 minutes to be able to work on this before I have to jump into my next customer to go in and go into the next spot here. Now I have 20 minutes I can focus on this, and I'm still monitoring everything over here. It allows us to be able to be more efficient and effective with the people that we have.
Yeah, I wanted to share a recent event. So Claude Code Security recently dropped, and
Yep.
I don't know if that's what caused a bunch of cybersecurity stocks to fall,
I
but
saw that. Yeah.
it created a lot of panic. And I just wanted to share a quote because I think it's pretty important for our current situation. In the 1800s, when coals powered, steam engines, and a new efficient steam engine came out, everyone thought, okay, coal use is going to go down because we have really powerful engines now. But in reality, what happened was more engines were used, more train networks were expanded, and it just increased coal consumption. And in my opinion, the same way, cybersecurity is just going to grow a lot larger when an analyst doesn't have to spend 30 minutes on a false positive anymore just to go through
Yep.
the procedure. He can now do more alerts, cover more ground in a single shift, and that trend is going to spread in every single discipline in cyber.
My question on Claude security, by the way, is if Claude was generating secure coding practices, why would they need Claude code security? It's funny. I have a Claude.md file that tells it how to code, right? And I say, here's how I want you to follow PEP 8 standards from Python. I want you to do this. I want, my code to be clean, focus on, holistic thinking of the solution, not just, very specific things. And I also put in there, ensure you're following all secure coding practices, follow the OWASP top 10 standards. And I can tell you, I can sit there for 20 minutes with the same prompt saying, I want you to do a full source code review, find all bugs, all security vulnerabilities, and then fix them, and then run the test again. And guess what happens? The first time it runs, he's like, I fixed all your bugs, all your security issues. It's all good. I'll run it again. Hey,
Yep.
I found 10 more. By the way, here's all the bugs I fixed. Hey, I found 10 more. I can literally just put it in a loop
Yeah.
for weeks, and it will still continue to find bugs and security flaws and things like that. And it's also important to note too, I've been developing, I can program pretty much in every programming language that's out there. I've been programming for over 25 years. And, something that would take me, let's just say 200 lines of Python, it's like 2,000 code, lines of code when you're using something like Claude. So the complexity is being drastically increased in many of these applications. And a lot of the vibe coding stuff that we're seeing out there has some pretty substantial issues that aren't caught in there. Now, again, I think it's going to get better over time. I think over the past 6 months, we've seen a real massive shift in how good, you can write full-fledged applications. I remember a year ago, I tried, developing a member portal for my buddy at the airsoft place, and it was a nightmare. It was, hallucinating, removing features,
Yeah.
couldn't remember anything I was doing before. It's gotten so much better, especially with like agent swarms and skills and things like that. But, it's going to continuously get better. But as an industry, security vulnerabilities, I always look at security as very similar to anything else. Humans, as we know, are not perfect, right? None of us are perfect. Not one person is perfect. We all make mistakes and issues and things like that. And until humans become perfect, we will always have cybersecurity
Yeah.
because humans are imperfect. And so you might look different, in a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. If you look at penetration testing as a great example, penetration testing, there was a big debate probably 15 years ago on, what constitutes a penetration test. And most companies were basically just running vulnerability scans with Nessus.
Mm.
They do some validation, and then you'd get a report. And that was considered a penetration test, right? And then, then they started releasing some automated penetration testing tools that would help you exploit on top of it. Does that constitute a penetration test? And so, this is just another, I think, evolution of like what defines,
Mhm.
a red team, what defines a threat hunt, what defines, detection engineering, that will continuously evolve, but always be a core principle of everything we're going to see out there in the industry.
Um, I think one thing I want to just address to like other leaders in different organizations is almost every analyst, in my opinion, is using AI at some point. I wish there was more transparency. I wish the leaders would get together and talk about AI, just talk, have conversations, open stuff up so that, us as analysts, we know what direction they're taking and like how much we can lean into it ourselves. Um, Getting back to threat hunting, a topic I want to bring up is a bunch of threat hunters have told us, hey, like I go on a threat hunt and usually I don't find anything. So, as an organization or as someone that sells threat hunting as a service, how do you capture, the time and the man hours that people spend threat hunting and then provide value to
Yeah.
clients?
Yeah, great question. So one thing, hitting the first question there on AI and leadership. So one thing that I made sure was crystal clear in both my companies is that we were going to be an AI centric company. When I saw it was the right time for it, so I basically put it out there. Hey, we will leverage AI at everything we do as long as it makes sense without exposing customer information. It has to be done in a methodical way. It has to be done in a very centric way. So all of our developers are armed with AI. We just rolled out Claude to the entire company
Nice.
over at TrustedSec. So all of our red teamers, penetration testers, application security folks, all have access to cloud again with stipulations. We can't do full source code analysis because obviously customer source code stuff like that. We have internal LLMs we use for source code analysis and things like that where the customer information isn't sent out. And we also use Claude's basically Copilot equivalent to help automation workflow within businesses. So all of our non-technical resources have access to Copilot to be able to help automate, and not Copilot, Claude to help with the stuff they're doing. And then our SOC analysts are absolutely able to leverage, AI, and it's part of, their tool sets they have available to them to be able to triage, analyze things like that. Obviously, with Night Beacon, we're arming them with the ability. They have a web UI they can go back into. And they can upload. We use Ember machine learning analysis for predictability on like entropy encryption, things like that. Disassembly of tools, reputational aspects, email analysis. All that can be used on top of what's automatically happening in the SOAR itself. So they want to do further investigation or they want to train the model better in certain areas. They can go and do that. So I think it's really important to have communication down from the leadership of how you're going to implement it. Now, again, it has to be methodical. Like we didn't just give Claude to our developers and said, hey, go for it, guys and
Yeah.
gals. We're like, hey, you have to follow this. By the way, here's a standardized Claude.md file, that has all of our security controls in it. Here's the proper cycles it has to go through from a secure coding perspective and testing standpoint. So we still have controls in how they're leveraging it. But one thing I can honestly say is that our development, we went from 6-month roadmaps to 2-week roadmaps. So being able to exponentially increase, how fast we can get and innovate, out to the market and to our customers is extremely important to us. So I think you'll see, that become more common. But I think where most organizations are really going to struggle is especially in the large enterprise. If you have a bad business process, you can't automate with AI a bad business process. So you have to restructure how things are working. How are you going to provide good data to that, so that it can spit out good data back to you? That's something that there was a Stanford research study that came out about 4 months ago that said that over 95% of AI projects are failing in the large enterprise. Now, so it's going to take a long time, before we really start to see the benefits of this. I think in most larger enterprises, which goes into a whole nother tirade, which I won't go into full details on. But now we actually have the ability for small to medium sized businesses to really compete with the big boys because they can innovate much faster and get better products out faster than this kind of working cog that has to go through this machine to kind of go through. So this is the first time in my lifetime where I've seen like, hey, small to medium sized businesses really has kind of an up leg on big corporations to be able to really disrupt a lot of those, which I think is really cool. On your second point on when we do threat hunts, we don't find anything. That's a great question, and I struggled with this early on too. But what I really focus on is the customer really doesn't want to see hits in their environment. That an APT has been in their group for 6 months, right? What they want to see is what are the inputs and outputs, and like can I communicate that of how their security program is getting much more sustainable and mature because we're performing those specific objectives. So it's the deliverables that come out of those threat hunts.
Yeah.
Having no hits is great, but at the same time, hey, by the way, we're able to add 7 new rules or detections in your environment for this specific adversary. And by the way, you have this portal that you can see all of your coverage and effectiveness that's mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework that shows all of these different areas. And now you have 7 more green marks there that weren't there before in the past. That's progress. And I think that's really where you start to see that. And I think when a new campaign comes out, a new actor is doing something different or has a new C2 or is running a different technique that you haven't seen before, being able to jump on that very quickly, within a few hours or a day, and providing that to the customer and saying, hey, by the way, now you have detections for this group and the new methods that they're using. That's invaluable to people that know how to digest that in their environment. And I mean, and you might have the original, sometimes you might have a success in finding something, and that basically validates what you've been doing for a long period of time. Or what's really cool is if someone's doing a penetration test or they actually experience a data breach and those detections fire based on what you're able to build, literally solidifies that program instantaneously and what you've been doing in the past as well. So it takes a little bit of time, but those outputs I think are the most important. How you communicate those outputs becomes the piece there.
Awesome. Okay. So in the last like 3 years since AI has come out, we've seen, software engineers go through an incredible transformation. I don't think there's any specialty anymore. Anyone can be a full stack engineer, even yourself or myself. We can be full
Yeah.
stack engineers. Now bring it to cybersecurity. Now, analysts don't have to worry too much about like the syntax of a query language that they use on their SIM. And there's all these other technical aspects where there's a lower entry barrier to entry. So how does that transform? Like, what does a full stack cybersecurity analyst look like now that they have that most analysts will be powered by AI? What should they really focus on? Should they really be focusing on, syntax? Obviously not, but what separates a really good analyst from an average analyst in this current or modern landscape?
I have a great example of this that literally just happened last week for us at Binary Defense. So we hired a new analyst, rock star, just absolute AI focused, everything, right? And he's only been working for us for 3 weeks. Okay, 3 weeks. That's it, three. And he's like, hey, I noticed that we don't really have a good way of showing the health of our environments to our customers,
Mhm.
where you can see coverage and effectiveness. You can see how many false positive versus true positives. You can seeing the changes that we do to provide better visibility into the customers. We don't show that to our customers in our platform. He's like, so you wrote it. And literally he demoed to me last week and I was like, oh my God, like now, and we're basically just doing testing right now. It's rolling on to production, in about another week or so. And so now our customers, when they log in, see so many additional statistics and data that they can bring back, report generation. We already had report generation, but like better report generation, granular report generation, right? Ways that you can improve, the customer experience. And the SOC analyst wrote it in 3 weeks. I think that's the strength that you see. So how not only, like you can easily be a SOC analyst and just go through your 9 to 5 or whatever shift you're on and go through alarms and you're doing a great job with SLAs and everything else. But then you can also be a SOC analyst that's like, hey, man, I see this vulnerability every single time across all of our customers. I'm going to write a new exception for this, and I can improve our detection on this to make it better. I'm going to use AI to help generate that and feed it all my data, come back with a much more refined rule. Or, hey, I notice this step takes me a lot longer than most stuff out there. So can I write an automation workflow and pass that out to the rest of my analysts? Because I know they're probably struggling with the same thing. So it's creating those efficiencies. One thing I do that I love AI with is when there's a new specific, attack that comes out, a 0-day or an exploit or something like that. I'll have something like ChatGPT or Grok or whatever you want to use. It'll go and it'll build a synopsis timeline of what it is, how it works. And then I use 11 Labs and it creates a funny podcast for me that I can listen to on the road and get familiar with it, right? And so I'm always just trying to like learn. And instead of me having to sit there and read the technical documentation around what's happening, I literally have a funny banter with two hosts that are completely fake, but they're making fun of each other. It's got comedy in it. It keeps me entertained. They're completely fake people, but now I leave that podcast knowing exactly what that specific thing's about. I think that's how you have to look at, your career in cybersecurity is like, how do I continuously build my knowledge up, leveraging these tools that can literally summarize something much quicker than I could reading through technical specifications or documentation, that allows me to get stronger as an analyst. And, that's the type of stuff that I think makes a really good analyst. And I think, if you look at how you differentiate yourself. And that's one topic we can dive way deep into is I'm noticing a lot of folks that are coming out of school. I have two buddies right now that really want to start at TrustedSec, but I still don't have a position for them at the moment. But the one individual just put over 200 resumes out trying to get hired in cybersecurity. And he has a cybersecurity degree. And he's looking for that break of getting in. And you had mentioned you folks came in and, within a year, you guys were making 6 figures. I can tell you came in at an amazing time in cybersecurity. It's very different now, and much harder to come through. And so what I suggested to him, specifically is, hey, your resume should literally be about how you're leveraging AI almost every single day, in your cybersecurity knowledge, to show that you can leverage this new kind of capability to augment and become more efficient at what you're doing. And I think that's really where, people that are going to be left behind are the people that are traditional cybersecurity practitioners, and the people that are augmented as cybersecurity practitioners and AI. That's really going to be the delineating factor of whether or not you get hired and whether or not you be successful in this industry. It's becoming a requirement everywhere. I see. I mean, I was just on a panel in Akron talking about kind of the future AI, and I was talking specifically about cybersecurity, but they had marketing folks there, they had manufacturing folks there. Every single one of them says they look for AI on their resumes. So it's one of those things that I think you have to adopt. You have to get comfortable with it. And it's just, right now, you have a very small window. So if you don't know about how the AI industry works today, it's not sustainable at all. It's a bubble. And why I say that, it's very similar to what I experienced in cybersecurity back in around 2020 to 2023, specifically during COVID. And so what happened in the cybersecurity industry is, we used to be a bunch of hackers in our basements, breaking into stuff and sharing our research. And that's where handles came from. My original hacker handle was Relic. And no one knew me by Dave Kennedy. We didn't know each other. We had no names, man. The movie Hackers. We were nameless. And so, that industry took off because we saw the value of it in the enterprise, and with technology, we had to build cybersecurity. And so it became a full-fledged industry. And then what happened is, venture capitalists and people with a lot of money started pushing tons of money into this industry to overnight inflate it. And so what happens is, if you know much about investments, so if let's just say I'm a startup and I get $30 million of investment, okay? You start spending like you are a $30 million company overnight. So that means, your sales folks, your staff, everything else. And so now you have this artificial bubble where you're not making $30 million. You might only be making $2 million. And between that investment time period, it's what we call our Series A funding. Then you go to B, C, D, E, F, G, and you're trying to create this rapid development of money coming in and trying to scale your company to get to that level of sales. And most of the time it doesn't work. So if let's just say you get $30 million in investment, and by the end of that, investors typically want a 3 to 5 year return. So let's just say in 3 years, you're a $15 million company, but you've been spending at a $30 million rate, you got to cut half your workforce. You got to stop the spending because you didn't get that $30 million, return that they were looking for. And so this industry was built off of that. You look at these big conglomerate companies, they're at Series D, E, F funding. They probably have, $1 billion of money that have been into that company to make them what they are today. But they're only, generating $200 million in revenue, yet they have $1 billion of investment, right? So, and so what happened in 2023-ish is that the cybersecurity industry really crashed. Because all of these companies and it's the same thing. Like we had a SOC analyst, that had 3 months of experience, get offered $160,000 job. We can't compete with that, but that company is no longer in business.
Oh,
So, they got 160,000, salary. They worked for 6 months and then the company went out of business. Right. So it was an artificial bubble with these crazy inflated salaries. I'm not saying cybersecurity folks shouldn't be paid. It's a very specific, industry, but 3 months out of college, you shouldn't be making $160,000. That's not sustainable. It's not sustainable in the capitalist society that we live in today. I want everybody to make $160,000. I want everybody to make $500,000, $10 million. That's great, but it's not sustainable in the market. And so you're seeing the same thing in AI. So if you take Claude, so I have the Claude $200 a month max plan. I max it out. Yeah, I'm going crazy. But if you look at what it actually costs Claude for me to use that, it's over $25,000 a month. So I'm burning $25,000 minus $200 of Claude's capital money that they're putting in. It's the same thing with OpenAI. OpenAI, is generating let's just say $1 billion in revenue, but they're being evaluated at $200 billion. Not sustainable. There's no way they're going to get to $200 billion, in revenue generation. So all of these back companies, a lot of them are going to fail. I think OpenAI is going to fail and get gobbled up by either, Google or Microsoft, these big companies that can afford to take on that burden. And so you're going to see a consolidation of all these companies being acquired by the big boys that have the money, and then the rest of the industry, and then the expense of that is going to go up substantially. I mean, Google's building nuclear power plants to be able to handle, the energy production costs of AI. Look at NVIDIA. NVIDIA is literally the sole provider of AI chips across the world. All of that is not sustainable long term. And so AI, right now is your opportunity where you can use AI very cheaply. I mean, even the $50 Claude a month one, you can literally become a software as a service provider overnight, and start your own businesses that way that you could never do before. Yeah. All of that's coming to a crash here in the next couple of years.
It's an interesting take. Yeah, no, and I
yeah, I mean,
one thing to hit on too, the frontier models. So if you look at frontier models being, OpenAI, Grok, Anthropic, Claude, all of Gemini, all of these frontier models are really good. They're the best out there, right? Yeah. But we're seeing now the large language models that you can build locally with like a Mac Mini, or using like Olama, for example. Like if you look at, I won't use this model, but the newest Qwen is basically on parity for Claude 4.5, which is the last model that Claude had. So about 6 months behind. So I also think you're going to see a lot of the local large language models become pretty close to parity of a lot of these other enterprise solutions. So, I think the local language models will become, the local large language models will become much more prolific in most organizations to be able to adopt. But here's the thing. I will tell you, I do work with the biggest companies in the world down to the smallest companies in the world. I mean, we work with 3 of the Fortune 5 or 4 of the Fortune 5, about 70% of the Fortune 1000 companies out there. And literally, I would say 98% of them are using just Copilot because it's easy. Yeah. And that's all they use, and so they're not leveraging or arming their developer. I mean, they might use, Codex or things like that, but they're not leveraging Claude in most cases. It's very hard for these companies to adopt them. And Copilot is very easy to implement in an organization. So I think, we still have a really long ways before the total adoption comes across. You're seeing AI take off now. The small to medium-sized businesses are adopting it. Innovators, entrepreneurs, things like that. That's creating this market right now. But until large enterprise really adopts it, there's no way these companies become profitable. No way.
Oh, you don't think large enterprises aren't already adopting it?
Not most of them at all. Maybe in some software engineering components, like the development side, but automation of workflow. I mean, just a great example. At TrustedSec, we have to, things like filling out RFPs, or statements of work, or customer security questionnaires. A lot of customers, like, hey, what are your security controls as you're accessing my data? What's your data retention policies? Things like that. We used to have Martin, our head of our consulting services, he's and our leadership team, he would do all those himself, and it would take him, a security questionnaire can take him 3 or 4 days. An RFP for our sales folks could take a week. We've automated all of that, so we have this LLM that we use locally, and it trains off of all of the historical questionnaires that we've ever done before in the past. And when a customer sends us a custom Excel, because none of them are standardized in any way, shape, or form, it'll automatically fill every single answer out based on historical knowledge. And if we don't have an answer for that, it'll just hit Slack real quick and say, hey, I don't have an answer for this. We respond back with the answer, it retrains the model so it knows in the future. It's cut his process down from a few days to 15 minutes. Same thing for RFPs. We have an automatic generation component for our RFPs where we literally can, a salesperson doesn't have to work with Martin or LZ and tie them up, in specific areas. They basically automatically generate the RFPs for us. And we still do checks and things like that to make sure it's filled out appropriately. But it's cut our process down to, again, salesperson within 10 minutes can have an RFP automatically filled out and submitted out to our customers. Report generation. We we used to have this tool. It's called bullet points. One of our Martin really hated bullet points in our reports, so we named it bullet point just to kind of throw it at him a little bit. And but it was this tool that we built, and it would take all of our tools and had a central knowledge base. So if we had a finding like SQL injection, we could pull that database and pull that finding directly in without having to rewrite the finding every single time with inconsistencies, and they'd all be properly QA'd with our QA team and stuff like that. We automated all that now to be able to generate that. And we don't use AI to stop the narrative. We think it's really important for the consultant to give the narrative of the security program, and we don't use it. We will use it for like finding sections, screenshot uploads, stuff like that. But it's still, I think, really important. Our deliverables are our report. So we don't use AI for those specific pieces, but we'll still, like in our C2, we'll leverage AI. It's kind of like choose your own path. So when our C2 comes back, it'll comb through all the security controls they have, what products they're using, potential paths to, objectives or things that we're trying to go after. And then it'll assist the operator into kind of choosing the next path they want to go to in the environment without triggering alarms or detections, or, automatically cancel out certain attack paths. If the AI knows it'll generate a detection. So, it kind of keeps it safe from an operator perspective to be able to get in where we need to. So I think there's a lot of like synergies across all the board. But again, it really comes down to like a lot of these companies, you have to have really good data in order to have really good data come out of it. And most companies aren't structured to be able to handle that right now.
Yeah, that's a common issue we hear from threat hunters themselves is when they enter an environment, they really struggle to have like proper sanitized, normalized data, which I feel like is an issue itself that
Yeah.
people, data engineers and whoever is supposed to deal with that should look at.
Yep.
I wanted to speak about, early career, just cyber folks, and you've probably met, thousands of cybersecurity professionals. What are like one or two indicators that you see early on that later were eventually like star players on a team?
Yeah. My biggest advice. So there's two. One, what shows up on a resume,
Hmm.
and two, what shows up in a characteristic that will make you successful in this industry. So one, when I talk about new folks coming into the industry, it's great that you have a degree. I didn't have a degree coming into cybersecurity. I had to go back and I got some BS degree, Bachelor's of Arts, in business or something. I don't even remember anything I learned in that thing, just because I was a VP at
Yeah.
Diebold and they required me to have a degree. So, mine's not even in computer science or security. I was self-taught, self-motivated. And that's the piece there where I talk about folks need to differentiate themselves. So yes, you have this degree, that's great. But what's your GitHub projects look like? What are some successes you've had, some blog posts you've written for things that were challenging for you that took you some time to rack your brain and figure out. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be like a 0 day you wrote or anything like that, but it could be just like, hey, here's how I set up my local home network with a Raspberry Pi and the networking components, showing that you understand the fundamental concepts and that you will take a concept and you'll take it to a reality. That I think is really important. If you can differentiate yourself on your resumes with that and code you've done, GitHub projects, things you've automated or done, that is really important. Some people say don't do cover letters. I'm a huge fan of cover letters because you can go to a company and be like, hey, I noticed, just based on your LinkedIn, stuff you guys leverage CrowdStrike or you Sentinel-1 or you do this, you do that. Here's how I think I can help you folks out. I did a lot of testing on here. I want to learn from the team. I want to, be the best I possibly can. Those types of things of personalization around understanding the dynamics of their company. I think can really differentiate yourself than just a straight resume. Now, characteristic wise, um, it's a balance of your profession in life, and that's one thing that I've always been really good at. I've always been a really good father. I'm always there for my kids. I'm at their volleyball games and basketball tournaments and things like that. I'm always there. But I also made cybersecurity my hobby.
Mm.
And it wasn't just a job for me. So, I was coding the social engineer toolkit on airplanes or 2 o'clock in the morning while my kids were sleeping, or writing Magic Unicorn or a new exploit because I enjoyed it because it was a hobby of mine. Anything, all my businesses that I've created are all hobbies of mine. My supplements company, because I used to be really obese and really struggled with health. And I got that under
You look
control.
great now. I couldn't even tell.
Thank you. Yeah, I was 315 pounds. I'll show you some pictures. I didn't look good. I was a big boy, but I've always struggled with weight my entire life. And I finally dove down into the science about thermodynamics and how our bodies work, and the science around how I can curb. I always just told myself, well, I'm just big bone. This is naturally how I am. No, it's not. I literally made changes in my life, small habits that turned into big habits that I was able to change to where I know I can be whatever I want to be. If I want to get bigger muscle, if I want to, in the wintertime, I'm actually about 15 pounds heavier than I normally am because in the wintertime, I pack on some extra muscle and some extra fat. And in the summertime, I shave it off so I look really good and, at the beach with my wife. And so, I made it my hobby to learn about how that works. And then through that, I just decided to create a supplements company because I didn't like the pre-workouts that were out there. They were, had a lot of really bad stuff in them. And I'm like, I'm going to make a science-based pre-workout supplement that actually works and actually focuses on you getting healthier. I mean, like we're one, I don't mean to get into the whole, but we're like one of the only pre-workouts that actually increase your sleep and recovery, as part of the pre-workout. You think of pre-workout like I'm jazzed up, but it also helps with sleep and recovery through a nutrient called GABA. So, it's like I made, cybersecurity my focus. And here's the thing, like someone may look at me and say, oh my gosh, you're Dave Kennedy. You're like a super genius and you're the smartest person ever. I'm not. I'm really not. Like I am like every other person here. I have gone through my own struggles of trying to learn things. I failed out of high school. I had to go to summer school just to pass. So I'm not this walking brain. I'm just very persistent at doing things. And offensive security. They have the OSCP course, the Offensive Security Certified Professional, and the other ones they have. But Mutz, who created Kali Linux and Backtrack Linux and Exploit DB, and his team, in the early IRC days, Internet Relay Chat days, there was this term that we would always say called try harder, and it became a thing that offensive security took up, and a lot of the cybersecurity industry, as it formed, was actually really against the try harder concept because they're like, hey, you're shutting out people in the industry, and that's not the intent. What try harder means is, we'd have people that would come into IRC chat and say like, hey, I can't get promiscuous mode working with my Atheros wireless card. How do I do this? They didn't look at any forum. They didn't do their own research. They didn't try troubleshooting it themselves. And so they're looking for a very specific answer to something they could figure out themselves. And so what the try harder concept is saying, listen, if you don't understand it, figure it out. Don't go to ChatGPT to tell you the answer for that because there's not always a tutorial in cybersecurity around what someone else has done before in the past. And so, I think we have to look at that and say, frustration when you don't know something is a sign of learning. Roadblocks, hard things that you get into our lives. Like there was a study that they did on video games, and they wondered why people in my generation in the 80s and 90s were much better at critical thinking and troubleshooting than the newer generation. And they actually equated it to video games. So video games back in my day were very difficult. You didn't have unlimited lives. You didn't have save points. You would get to level 10 and then you die. You start back to level 1 again. And it created this sense of frustration to get better and to get through challenging times to move forward. Nowadays, it's all about dopamine responses and that immediate gratification. You don't learn those pieces there of frustration to push yourself into a different category. And I can give you one story real quick. Early on, when Microsoft first released data execution prevention, or DEP, it was a way of protecting against what we call buffer overflows or stack overflows. And the way that it works is, let's just say you have a password field and the programmer put in, you can only allow 1,000 password or 1,000 character password, but you put 1,001 and they didn't properly handle that in lower level programming languages like C or C++. What would happen is the application would crash. What's actually happening behind the scenes is that in assembly, so the one stage below binary, so assembly language, your application has a stack, and the stack executes specific assembly instructions that end up running that application. So C interprets the assembly to binary. And so what would happen is, that A would be shot into memory into your stack, and it would cause the application to crash because it doesn't know how to handle an A. And so with Stack Overflows, you could, determine exactly where that crash was,
Mhm.
and you can rewrite memory, and you can say, hey, redirect execution flow to here. It's what we call remote code execution, and you can execute your own shell code or assembly code directly into memory. Well, Microsoft created this technology called data execution prevention. What it does is it marks the stack read only. So when a stack gets created and that code gets created, it doesn't allow overwriting of that data. Very amazing technology, and it shut down buffer overflows as we knew it today.
Mhm.
And there was a Frack article that came out around an experimental way of getting around data execution prevention, but there was no proof of concept code. There was no exploits previously written on it. So I'm like, hey, I want to learn this. This sounds like an awesome idea. So I spent like 2 weeks in my basement with like pizza boxes and cola everywhere. Again, I was a big boy, and I was going through it, and it was the most frustrating time I've had in my life. I am so dumb. I don't understand this. Like I don't understand return oriented programming, or ROP. It wasn't called ROP at the time. I don't understand how all this works. And through that frustration, I just kept pushing myself. I'd go upstairs, I'd take a break, I'd be thinking about it when I'm sleeping. I'd wake up with an idea, I'd write it down, and I'd go back to sleep again. I just obsessed about that specific topic, and it was, at that time, unobtainable. I couldn't get
Mhm.
there. And 2 weeks after, I had a breakthrough, an epiphany. I'm like, I understand this now. I know exactly how this works. I know how to get around it. And I wrote one of the first exploits that got around data execution prevention. And so those are the things that I think when you look at, you know, um, security, it's pushing yourself through challenges. It's pushing yourself in a way that you haven't done before in the past. And, that really makes you a very strong person that will make you successful in this industry. Just don't accept that anybody, sorry, my camera keeps going on, but don't accept that someone in the past has done something, and they haven't discovered it before. Just understand, like, hey, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to look at the previous research. I'm going to expand on this and make it better. That's what makes you a really good security person.
Yeah, I love that ethos because for me, I went from I couldn't do this to I could learn everything about, this industry, this computers, and then I could piece it together and I could talk to people and make sense of it, and now I can do it. And I think like the same way you were like, oh, I was 350 pounds, but I learned everything about, science and thermodynamics, and I was able to, like hack my way into losing weight. I love that mindset. I feel like I can apply that to everything, and that's why I love cybersecurity, and we love what we're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate those
Oh
stories.
yeah.
To everyone else, like you can learn it, and honestly, you can do anything you want.
Anybody. And it's the thing, like, when I wrote Night Beacon, our AI solution for our customers, I had no idea what I was doing. No idea. No
Yeah.
clue. I was the anti-AI guy, and so I was like, all right, I need to learn everything I possibly can about large language models, how they work, how they interpret. Can I build my own model without anybody else's? And I wrote my first large language model that, wasn't based off of anything else, understanding predictive sequencing and analysis. Like, but again, there's YouTube videos available for that. There's research papers that are available for that. It just takes the time to go through and do it. I have so many books back here that half of them I probably haven't even read, that I just didn't have time to do. But like when I wanted to learn assembly, I went and got, the art of assembly language,
Mhm.
and so I just started reading through it. And some of the stuff I didn't care about, some of it I did. I took away nuggets, and then I built up on that knowledge, and then I eventually became, knowledgeable in those areas. So, it's those types of things that are obtainable in this industry, and it just requires you to have to go through, persistence and that feeling of failure, and then pushing through that feeling of failure and being successful with it. I mean, when I started TrustedSec, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to start an LLC. I had no idea how to register an LLC. I had no idea how to do payroll. I had no idea how to do any of this. Now I have close to 500 employees worldwide across both my companies. I never thought I would have a company, that would have that many employees. I think Aaron and I said, once we hit about 20 or so, we'll stop, we'll be good. Now I got, close to 500 now. So, you learn as you go through these experiences, and I've had many failures, and I always get asked the question. It's a common question that someone will always ask me is like, if I could go back in time, would there be anything I would change? And the answer to that is absolutely not.
Yup.
Those failures are what made me successful. You can't go through life without failures and learning upon them to become successful. That's what makes you successful. Now, I probably would invest a little bit more in Nvidia stock and some Bitcoin stuff, but like hindsight 2020, okay, yeah, maybe that's one thing I would go back and change, but but I'd probably be a different person then. I probably wouldn't have the same company or focus. I'd be focusing on other things. So, I am who I am today because of my failures.
Yeah, I love that. And honestly, it's not too late to invest in Nvidia or Bitcoin. Bitcoin's
I
like
agree. I agree.
65K.
I, I'm,
We
I'm I got some Nvidia stock, got some Tesla stock, got some,
Hell
other
yeah.
stocks. So yeah, Google stock, Microsoft stock, I'm good.
Um, I do want to wrap this interview up. We
Yeah.
love that you came on. I do want to shout out one of our friends because you mentioned you grew up in like IRC chats and you had a that's how you like made your name initially, or that's how you learned. One of our friends, Jalen Mulberry, 106. We grew up in a Discord chat. Again, we like dropped out of college or we didn't have a direction, so we just joined random Discord servers and talked to them.
Awesome.
And they're all people in the industry now. They're all doing great things, and I believe he works at BDS. So
Yeah. Oh yeah.
shout out to 106.
Absolutely. Great dude.
Um, yeah,
Yeah,
awesome.
it's one of those things that, like finding those people that can help guide you and mentor you. Like I equate a lot of my success to a lot of the early folks that really created this industry. You look at HD Moore, for example. I learned so much from HD Moore, who wrote Metasploit. I mean, just that guy is probably the smartest person I've ever met in my entire life. So when I talk about like, there's not people that are, everybody's equal and stuff like that, and everybody's smart, and you can learn anything. Except the exception is HD. Like that guy is literally the a genius. Like he is the smartest person. That guy. I remember one time I wrote this exploit and I didn't know Ruby really well, and it was a new bypass. It was a 0 day for UAC, user access control, to circumvent UAC controls. And I spent like 3 weeks on it. I was so nervous submitting it to HD. And I submitted to him. I'm like, hey man, here you go. Here's a working exploit. I've tested it and all these things. Here's all the stuff. He's like, comes back like 20 minutes later. He's like, hey man, this is amazing. Thank you. I'm gonna get committed to Metasploit right now. I just made a couple changes, and I don't think there was one line of code that was the same of mine that actually made it into Metasploit. You wrote the whole thing,
Yeah.
much better than I ever could. That guy's an absolute genius. But I mean, you look at Matty Arhoni Mutz, who started, Kali Linux, Backtrack Linux, iWax, and a few other ones, Wapix, a few others. Matty was one of my mentors. Growing up in this industry, I was in the military intelligence space, and I was looking at getting out and coming into the private sector. And I said, hey Mutz, like, how do I, be successful in something? How do I learn Python? I think it was one of my first questions to him. He's like, hey man, just figure out a tool that would be good for you, and then just write it.
Mm.
I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. And so my first tool I ever wrote was called Fast Track, which was a really popular exploitation framework. 2005 to 2010, I spoke at DEF CON and ShmooCon on it and everything else. Got my first break in security because of it.
Mm.
Because Mutz told me just write the tool that you want.
Yeah.
And that's how I picked up, Python programming language. Is because I decided to write a tool that made my life easier, automation of exploitation, and it became really popular in the industry because I shared my research. So, everything is obtainable, but finding mentors, people that are good folks that have come up, can really provide a lot of knowledge and community. And I think that's the important part here is community is something that was really big in our industry early on. And it still is really big today, even though it's become commercialized. So finding a community that has your best interest at heart, as well as themselves, and that community you can find, whether it's on Discord or it's a local meetup, security meetup,
Yeah,
the
have you heard
things
of
that you can do
BurbSec
to have.
in
What's that?
Chicago? Have you heard of BurbSec in Chicago?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's where I got all my jobs from. That's where I
yeah.
met a lot of my friends today.
Networking with people that have shared interest in community. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any final questions?
No, I mean you gave us a lot of great insight, Dave, and we're really excited for this episode. We do appreciate all of the sauce. We're gonna transcribe this and maybe even watch it again, right? There's just that much information and that much that we learned. So we
Yeah.
really appreciate it again.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, I appreciate what you guys are doing too. Back at you, being able to share your knowledge and your expertise. I mean, you folks are relatively new in this industry, not relatively new, but I mean, in comparison to this,
yeah.
coming in and being able to share your experiences for the next generation of folks that are coming into the industry is invaluable. So I appreciate what you guys are doing and getting folks on, and happy to introduce you to some more folks that have on that are great perspectives in the industry.
Yeah, we were
That
wondering
just
if we could get connected to any threat hunters at TrustedSec.
yeah,
Pick their
absolutely.
brain, have more technical episode. Like if they're doing a day to day, we'd love to talk to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of my good folks, he's our practice lead for our incident response team, Ryan McFarland. He was in the FBI for over 20 years in their cyber division. Seen some really cool stuff. Has some amazing stories. He'd be a good one. Carlos Perez, who ran our IR team for a number of years, and as well as others. We have a lot of folks on the threat hunting team. Some good folks, that I'm sure would be happy to come on and talk to you folks. So I'll make those introductions.
I appreciate it. Thank you
Well,
so
Yeah,
much.
yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Dave.
absolutely, guys. Take care. Have a good
And,
one.
and I just want to say one thing. I love you because from the second you responded to us, I just knew that's how I wanted to move, and now I very much look up to you. So thank you so much. I
Oh,
know you
hey,
do a lot. You
thank
have
you.
like you
Very
support
humble.
esports teams, support basketball teams. You invest a lot in your community. That's how I want to move. That's my dream as well. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, it's all about community, guys. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very humbled. So thank you. Have a good
Thank you,
one.
Dave.
See you
Have a
guys.
nice rest of your
Yep.
day.
You too. Bye.